So Uber inks a 6-year robotaxi deal with Lucid, invests $300 million in the EV company. That was certainly the AV news of the week, so let's dive in. Key points: Uber on Thursday announced a $300 million partnership to deploy more than 20,000 robotaxis over the next 6 years. 20,000 over the next 6 years as demand for driverless cars kicks into high gear. The ride-hailing company will invest $300 million in Lucid. Nuro, which many of you probably haven't heard of yet, will build the self-driving technology that will be used by Lucid to supply Uber at least 20,000 robotaxis over the course of the deal. We're going to have a closer look at Nuro here in a moment. By the way, Uber is also invested in Nuro. Apparently there's a multi-$100 million investment in equity that between the two companies, but nothing more specific is known about that investment. But Uber, of course, having decided a while ago and having abandoned their own AV efforts to build their own platform, to build their own self-driving technology, their own vehicles, etc., are now going all in on these partnerships. It's very well known by now that they have partnered with Waymo, and Waymo cars can be ordered and hailed through the Uber platform, through the Uber app in certain locations. And they're going basically all in on the partner versus build model. And this one is brand new. And of course, it's great news for Lucid, whose stock has popped over 36% today on the news. The company's plan to launch the robotaxis in a major U.S. urban hub next year. So 2026, launch in a major U.S. urban hub. Nothing special here about that. That is how all companies start, is pick one large hub and start the service there. We're going to have a look at, Nuro's track record and why they're picking such a relatively unknown vendor. Uber on Thursday announced a partnership to deploy more than 20,000 robotaxis over the next 6 years as demand for driverless cars kicks into high gear. Now, this is actually an interesting statement. Demand for driverless cars kicks into high gear. The Uber CEO, Dara Khosrowshahi, was on two different stages over the last month or so, and I actually also shared that on Twitter. 1 month ago, on stage at Bloomberg Tech, Uber CEO said, "We're going to need more drivers on the platform, human drivers, for the next couple of years," in response to a question about competition from autonomous vehicles and robotaxis versus human drivers. So a month ago, he said, we're going to need more drivers on the platform for the next couple of years. That's not really that far out. Interestingly enough, 2 weeks later, at Cerebral Valley AI Summit in London, he said something different. He said, "I am 100% sure that 5 years from now, we're going to need more humans on our platform than we do today." Now, let's keep reading. A couple sentences later, "The increase in drivers and couriers that we need on the platform may start metering out. Business is just growing really fast. 10 years from now, I'm not sure about the slope of that curve." So hang on. They're expecting kind of growth, okay? A month ago for 2 years, a couple of years, okay? 2 weeks later, 2 weeks ago now roughly, he said, still expecting growth, still more humans than we do today. But then a couple sentences in that same event, in that same paragraph almost, he said, 10 years from now, I'm not sure about this. So to me, that does not sound like someone having a clear picture of where the trajectory is going between human drivers and kind of the growth of the business. And, at what point they've kind of peaked, peak human, if you like. I do think he has corrected his trajectory between those two interviews. I think maybe someone pointed him out that, that's not a great message for the drivers to say, look, in the next couple of years, we're going to need more drivers, but then it might kind of level out, right, or go down. So he amped that number up. But what is it now, 5 or 10? So yeah, kind of interesting observation, and those are the things you got to keep an eye on as you're observing this space. So let's keep going. I'm going to skip over the next couple paragraphs as they're just a repetition of the key points listed above. Nuro, which is backed by Google and the SoftBank Vision Fund. So that's interesting, right? We heard earlier that they had an investment from Uber, also backed by Google, who is of course owned by Alphabet, who also owns Waymo, and good old SoftBank. They will provide a level 4 self-driving system software for the cars. Now, Nuro started off, and we're going to look a little closer at that company in a minute, started off tackling the entire stack of pretty much similar to what Uber had originally intended to do before, and several others. And they all kind of realized, okay, too much. It's too much to tackle and take on. Let's focus on just providing the sensors and the hardware as well as the software for the driver system. So the technology can drive passengers under normal traffic and weather conditions without a human behind the wheel. The language chosen here, probably by the editor, you need to be really careful here because that is exactly what this all comes down to. What are the conditions under which these vehicles may drive? Tesla launched the Robotaxi service in Austin, very small, very careful, slow rollout on June 22nd. And they're known to having started with only allowing basically driving in good weather, right? But we've seen first videos where the car was let kind of go and drive through rain. So we certainly know from FSD testers, and I have been testing the FSD system myself for the last 3 years, that FSD performs just fine in rain as well as at nighttime when it's dark. So you have to pay really close attention to this kind of language, right? That's so critical. What are the conditions going to be? And this is how these providers will be evaluated as, right? Or do they support driving under conditions that might not be perfect? The partnership with Lucid and Nuro follows Uber's alliance with Alphabet back to Waymo. The two companies expanded their service to Atlanta and Austin, Texas early this year, which is fantastic. And they're now kind of in a headlock with Tesla on kind of expanding their area. There was a lot happening this week, and I might cover that in a later video of how kind of the launches have been going. Obviously, Waymo has been added for way longer than Tesla in terms of actually offering a driverless service. So it's going to be interesting to observe and watch closely how these two companies and others that are getting on the scene and become more visible, like Nuro with these news, how they will perform in the same area. Waymo's vehicles are also considered level 4 as defined by SAE. Tesla sells cars today equipped with autopilot and FSD supervised systems. So these are two different software stacks, completely independent. FSD in the supervised fashion, where a human driver still needs to be in the driver's seat. That's what people can buy today. Tesla is the only provider and manufacturer that actually sells cars that can then also serve as robotaxis. And of course, here the idea is that owners of these vehicles can eventually submit their cars into the fleet of robotaxis, and so the cars can make money for them. This article claims that these fall into the level 2 category, which is true. I'm going to cover the categories in a later video. There's a lot of misinformation about them, misunderstanding. I'm not going to go too much into depth here in this video, but it is true that currently they are requiring a human at the wheel for when you own them yourself. But the first couple dozens of vehicles now in operation, in active service in Austin by Tesla do no longer have drivers in the driver's seat. So Lucid said the 450-mile range for its Gravity vehicles should help cut costs and charge times, blah, blah, blah. The program may eventually include, so it's the Gravity vehicles that are being used and we can have a look here in a second of what kind of cars those are. But Winterhoff said the program may eventually include future Lucid vehicles currently in development, of course. Testing for the first prototype vehicle is underway. Okay, so basically the vehicle incorporates the technology from Nuro on a closed circuit at Nuro's Las Vegas-based proving grounds. In April, the startup raised $106 million in a funding round from T. Rowe Price, Fidelity, Tiger Global, and Greylock. The deal is a blueprint for a robotaxi program that's both commercially viable and globally scalable, Nuro said in a statement to CNBC. So who is Nuro? If you look at their website, nuro.ai, of course, they're leading with this announcement, which, of course, is one of the biggest that they have had to make and been able to make to date in their young trajectory, which actually isn't that young. We'll look into the timeline here in a minute. So if we scroll down, autonomy for all roads, all rides, meet the Nuro driver. That seems to be the thing that these systems are called driver. Waymo calls their system the Waymo driver as well. An AI-first self-driving system that empowers automakers and mobility providers to scale autonomy responsibly. So this is, of course, the spiel of the software providers and hardware makers. Europe does both. That they enable both the automakers who have chosen, a lot of them have tried their own efforts to the realm of autonomous driving, but have given up and are now choosing to partner with companies like Nuro. And then secondly, there is, of course, the cities, the municipalities that might want to offer self-driving vehicles, be it as taxi or shuttle services or bus services, as part of public transportation. So those would be the mobility providers referenced here. Talked about L4 autonomy, and we can have a closer look at this company a bit more depth in a separate video. If you look at the sponsors and the partners, Uber, of course, NVIDIA, the NVIDIA Thor system on chip design is what they use now for their technologies. They used to go with individual, CPUs, GPUs, and processors to kind of build their AI, but they've readily and happily embraced the Thor system by NVIDIA. Then, of course, Lucid, we see Google here, and ARM. So if we look at the company, we see a bit of a timeline. So founded in 2016, 9 years ago. So they've been around for a little while. Development in the first year. So in the first generation custom L4 vehicle was built in 2017. So again, this was at a time when they thought that they would still manage to build a full stack of autonomous technology, the car, the software, the sensors, the hardware, as well as actually operating a fleet. So most of these types of companies have moved away from that idea. 2018, first commercial delivery with a custom L4 level 4 vehicle. Okay, that's great. 2020, federal government grants the first ever AV exemption to Nuro. So there's no law yet in the US about general kind of regulation for autonomous vehicles in the sense of the underlying AI. There is now with the so-called Big Beautiful Bill, an article or a part of that is a AI preemption bill that will disallow the states to create their own AI regulation. So there's preparation for introducing something, but nothing is currently there and in place in terms of federal system for AI and specifically on the AV front. But of course, many are pushing for that to be the case so they don't have to work state by state. Nuro completes driverless L4 operations in 3 states. That's great. Again, completes driverless operations, probably with a driver in the seat for safety reasons, right? So you have to read between the lines and really understand whether that is done, without someone in the driver's seat or with. And then California apparently granted the first ever AV deployment permit to Nuro. 2 years later, expansion of autonomous operations in California and Texas. 2023, over 1 million autonomous miles driven with 0 at-fault incidents. Okay. I don't know why their journey stops at 2023. They should probably update their website. We scroll down a bit. They now talk about 1.4 million autonomous miles driven with 0 at-fault incidents. Of course, sometimes these cars are involved in incidents. If it's not their fault, that's something you can't avoid. That's just physics. So we can assume maybe that 400,000 miles have been added in the last 2 years. And they list again as key accomplishments that their driver system is applied across 9 vehicle platforms. Okay. The first AV to receive NHTSA approved exemption. Over 5 years of L4 autonomous driving on public roads. Again, yeah, you know, details. Details is what we need. But anyway, not too bad. There is a bit more, investors, right? So we heard about SoftBank, Greylock. What I found interesting when I looked at this list is Chipotle and Kroger, the retailer. Chipotle, right? Quick service restaurants, the QSRs, of course, depend on delivery. And if they can find a way to cut cost for delivering their food, that would be a major competitive advantage. If they can basically bring you their food for cheaper, then they will dramatically expand their available addressable market or basically their market share. And that is probably why Chipotle is an investor in this company. Same with Kroger, a lot of delivery happening in the retail space. Okay. They are still looking for new engineers. No wonder, right? They got new funding, as we saw. And with these news, of course, they're currently on a great trajectory. So I wish them well. And we shall see where this all leads. And we'll keep an eye here at how this all develops with Uber, with Lucid, and Nuro. Have a good one. Bye-bye.